You know what he reminds me of? You ever seen The Exorcist?
Of course.
Okay, you know how Linda Blair is spewing things, her head's turning? Sort of reminds me of him. Okay, not that I think his head's turning, but sort of that kind of image of pain. Okay, that's what I'm seeing going on in here.
Welcome to Seeing Dead People, the slow burn storytelling podcast where our host, Nicola, challenges her psychic friend Darcy to communicate with the dead and unravel historical ghost stories, unsolved true crime mysteries, and all things paranormal.
Well, he, still alive, didn't think he was being murdered. So that's a bit odd, don't you find?
Well, yeah, because one would think that he'd be screaming foul play.
Exactly.
He gives me such a headache. He, I think he was very manipulative. I don't think anyone really liked him. He made
Really?
successful in life, which would allow him some of the prestige, especially as a doctor. But I'm looking at him and I think that he may have repulsed more people than he drew towards him. He makes me quite nauseous. So I have to ask, was he big into hypnotism?
If you want to be spooked, amazed, and entertained, stick around for an astonishing, deep dive convo with the spirits on the other side. Radio Sydney presents Seeing Dead People, episode 45. The Victorian scandal that shocked Britain, poisoning Charles Bravo.
Today, Darcy, we're going to approach our story a little differently, and I'm really not sure how you're going to react because it might be more difficult for you. I really don't know. But I think it's going to be kind of a fun and interesting experiment because I'm not going to give much introduction to the storyline. Instead, we're just going to jump ahead directly into one of our story's key elements. Are you game?
Sure, I'm game for anything. But so, looking at the very first picture of the castle,
Yep.
okay, I feel a little nauseous, which normally means a murder's taken place or something dubious has taken place at this castle.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, this is Seeing Dead People, and we generally talk about deep, dubious, and nasty and nefarious deeds. So yeah, I think you're getting a good sense there. Okay, well, imagine you're looking at that first photograph. So imagine you're in a beautiful country home, which it certainly is. It's in our photo number one. It's nicknamed the Priory. It's in the quiet English countryside of Surrey, southwest of London, in a little place called Balham. So really, it's actually in Greater London, but it's its own entity. Any vibes other than you think you're feeling a bit nauseous and something dubious happened here?
Well, when you say priory, I automatically thought it was I actually thought it was a monastery originally when I first looked at it.
Oh, really?
Because it just gives me that very structured feeling. But I take it this is a family home of some sort. But I also get the impression that it may have been more than just a family home. It could have been like a business as well, or maybe it's turned into a business after, and that's what I'm picking up.
Okay. Well, all around lies picturesque rural farmland and sprawling upper class family estates, and everything appears orderly, lovely, and safe. But if you know your Sherlock Holmes, you'll immediately twig to the possibility that danger lurks by.
Oh,
Holmes tells Watson in The Adventure of the Copper Beeches that it is my belief, founded on my experience, that the lowest and vilest alleys in London do not present a more dreadful record of sin than does the smiling and beautiful countryside. Do you agree with that?
totally. I think there's more go on in the country than people realize.
I do too. I think a lot of terrible and sinister events can occur hidden away in distant rural houses where there are no independent prying eyes and where violence can run rampant with impunity.
Right.
So nobody can hear victims' screams. Sometimes in these large houses, nobody's going to watch and see the perpetrators sneaking out and ditching the bodies into wells and ditches and cellars.
Yeah.
So there is a real concern about terror and danger happening in an English countryside. For our story today, we are in 1876. The month is April. The day is the 18th, and the time is early evening. We enter the impressive blocky stone priory and mount the sweeping staircase to a large, opulent bedroom. As we arrive on the landing, Darcy, we slow and stiffen, hairs prickling on our necks and arms. What's going on?
Well, someone may be screaming by the sounds of it, or someone is dying in the process of dying. At least it sounds like that, because I can hear, like, it's funny because my sister said to me today that Granny B used to say, if it hurt and you're screaming, then it doesn't hurt enough. And I'm going to apply that to this. Okay. The idea that the person's hurt, they're screaming, but obviously they haven't been hurt enough because they're still screaming.
Okay, well, you're right on. We hear disturbing and frightening noises. We edge forward, not too keen on getting any closer, but we must. We cautiously enter through the massive creaking door and peer inside to the huge four-poster bed. The terrible sounds of retching, screaming, and begging cries for help fill our ears. The air stinks of a suffocating and acrid melange of candle wax, bluebell and cowslip blossoms, human waste, sweat, and dread. Someone is thrashing about in the large bed. Instinctively, we know this person is in agony and in peril of dying. Any idea who the unfortunate afflicted is here, Darcy?
Well, originally I thought it was a lady by the sounds of the voice. Okay. But I could be corrected here. I've heard men with loud pitched voices like that. So can I ask, is it like a doctor?
No, it's not a doctor in pain, no.
Okay. But is a doctor present in pain? Or is a doctor present?
Well, a doctor will be present fairly soon.
Okay. I'm ahead of myself. So can I ask, is this a lady?
No, I mean, you can ask, and no, it's not a lady.
So it is a man with that high pitched voice.
Well, I guess you can hear the high-pitched voice. I just can tell you it's a man in the bed, and it's really kind of the worst time to introduce you to him because he's in terrible shape. But his name is Charles Turner Bravo, a lawyer of inherited wealth and prominence, more accustomed to living a life of leisure, extravagance, and indulgence. But let's meet our 30-year-old humdrum lawyer in a happier time. So let's look at photo number 2, Darcy. Okay. What do you think, Charles Bravo, before we see him in this bed writhing for his life?
Well, I just need to say one thing. You know what he reminds me of? You ever seen The Exorcist?
Of course.
Okay, you know how Linda Blair is spewing things, her head's turning? Sort of reminds me of him. Okay, not that I think his head's turning, but sort of that kind of image of pain. Okay, that's what I'm seeing going on in here. But looking at him, for the time, he's probably handsome. You know, he's got hair and mutton chops.
Right.
Doesn't look like a bad looking person. He doesn't look conceited for a rich person.
Okay.
Like, have you ever seen rich people, especially at that time frame? They sort of have their head up a little.
Yep.
You know, that old expression, looking down your nose.
Yes, yes, he's not doing that, is he?
No, he seems quite handsome.
Yeah, it's a good profile of somebody. I think he's got maybe a weak chin, as my mother would have said.
Yes.
Otherwise, he's attractive enough.
Well, not with that chin, but nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, I'll fill you in a bit on Charles's life, Darcy. His last name originally at birth was Turner, but instead he chose Bravo, which was his stepfather's name. As I said, he came from wealth and was educated at Trinity College, Oxford. He studied the law and was called to the bar in 1870. Despite coming from money and a good social position, Charles desired more. Any idea what might be missing in this man's life, Darcy? Have a look at photo number 3, which is a sketch of Charles at a pretty similar angle. It may not help at all, but what do you think this man is desperately needing?
Well, one would think that it would be wealth and recognition, but it could be family. It could still have some of the money involved in that, but I would say it's about belonging.
Okay, so would you call that validation from his peers and his society?
Thank you. That's the word to use.
Well, that's exactly it. Charles was desperate for validation. He wanted acclaim from his peers, but most importantly from society at large. It seemed he just didn't get enough of it, despite the fact that he had a pretty good social position, despite the fact that he had some money and that he was a lawyer, which was a good profession. His legal career was unremarkable. I guess he felt perhaps his wealth was insufficient and his social status seemed stagnant. So he attempted to gain money and better society in his next major life move. So what did he do, Darcy?
Well, I would have said he probably married into money and married like a debutante, someone who would be recognized, like maybe her father would have the title of count or whatever they were back then. I would have thought he'd move into family.
Okay, well, you're very close. In December 1875, Charles married a gal named Florence Ricardo, nee Campbell. She was also his age, 30. Let's get to know Florence first through her likeness in our photo number 4. What do you think of Florence?
Oh, she's beautiful.
Isn't she just beautiful? She's in a spectacular gown, isn't she?
Yeah.
With the pearls and the hair up and pearls around her wrist, pearls around her neck. She's got that very soft, glowing kind of Rubenesque skin and body type. She's really spectacularly good looking, I think.
Oh, absolutely. She has that, what is it, English rose or English milk?
Yes, yes, very much so. That skin tone, right?
And she looks way younger than 30.
What do you think?
I think she does. She's got wisdom in her eyes. Okay. But she is, out of some of the pictures you have shown me in doing this show, she is the most beautiful one I've seen yet.
Yes, I was really struck by how beautiful she is.
I also get a kindness about her, but I got a funny feeling she's got strength to her.
Well, that's interesting. Good point. Well, she's had more of a life than you might have thought when you originally said that Charles might marry a debutante. She had previously been married to a Canadian named Alexander Ricardo, who unfortunately was a philanderer and a mean drunk. And he had at least one full-time mistress and one illegitimate child.
Wow.
This marriage eventually stalled after she visited a health and hydro spa in Malvern, Worcestershire in 1870. She was treated by a renowned homeopathic hydrotherapist, Dr. James Gully. The doctor recommended she legally separate from her husband for the sake of her own health and well-being. And despite her family's furious objections, Darcy followed the good doctor's advice. Let's have a look at the good doctor. It's actually a caricature of him in photo number 5. What do you think of this dapper 67-year-old physician?
Sort of reminds me of Freud. He looks harmless, doesn't he? He looks a little short. His proportions definitely, it's not made to proportion because it's like he's old barrel and these stumps.
Right.
I don't know, like he looks harmless, but I don't think he is. I think he's quite capable of the word murder here.
Okay.
Right.
Well, Florence and Alexander's troubled union finally ended about a year later when Ricardo dies from violently and continuously vomiting blood during an alcoholic binge. So
that's her first husband, right?
That's her first husband, right?
Oh, wow. So they investigated that one to find out how he managed to die so violently?
Not at all. That he just died from his own poor health, drinking too much and vomited. So he had been verbally and physically abusive to Florence during their 6-year marriage. But in the end, Florence laughed last and heartily because the Canadian cad had bequeathed her a vast fortune.
Wow.
40,000 pounds. That's equivalent to 6 million pounds today, or get ready on your seat, 10 million Canadian loonies.
Wow.
Wow. Isn't that some amount of money? So the stinking rich and incredibly attractive widow, Florence, would you not say was a perfect match for Charles Bravo?
Absolutely.
Well, not so quick though. After her life with Alexander Ricardo, Florence was now a woman of obviously vast independent means and some pretty interesting experiences. She had purchased her own swanky home along with servants and horses and all the trappings of upper British societal life after he died. And she started a romantic relationship with another man. Any ideas, Darcy?
The doctor?
Now, why would you even think that? Looking at him, he's a 67-year-old, overly barrel-chested, pot-bellied guy on sticks, wearing binoculars and having a hook nose. Not an attractive man at all, and she is drop friggin' dead gorgeous.
Because he was her therapist, right?
Yes.
And at that time and frame, well, they didn't use drugs so much but they used hypnotism, homeopathic therapy. I would say that she believed she was attracted to him because he was safe.
Because he was safe.
Yeah, because he's a doctor. Who would think a doctor would do something wrong?
Right. Okay. Well, believe it or not, they got it on big time. Their 37-year difference in age was apparently a non-issue, at least to them. He was married, but had been separated from his wife, who was 17 years his senior, for over 30 years.
Wow.
And supposedly he and Florence planned to marry upon his wife's demise. So she's getting on into her 80s here. Well, when Florence purchased this beautiful stately home we saw in our first photo, the Priory, Dr. James Gully retired from his physician work and health spa and moved to a stately home a couple of blocks away from Florence. The oddly matched pair continued to spend time together, visiting, shopping, going riding, but according to Florence's servants, James never stayed overnight. So have a gander, another shot of Dr. Gully. It's a sketch of now a front-on-face sketch, and tell us what you think about the relationship, Darcy. And more importantly, what did Florence's family and social circle think of this?
Well, I would say the social circle would have been quite mean about it.
Yep.
Looking at him here, he doesn't look like he's like in his 60s, 80s. So whoever drew the picture softened the lines.
Mm-hmm.
He gives me such a headache. I think he was very manipulative, is the word on him. I don't think anyone really liked him. He
Really?
Successful in life, which would allow him some of the prestige, especially as a doctor. But I'm looking at him and I think that he may have repulsed more people than he drew towards him. He makes me quite nauseous. So I have to ask, was he big into hypnotism?
I couldn't tell you anything about his practice other than he was a hydrotherapist, which is this idea of therapy using water. I'm sure, as you said, perhaps hypnosis. Who knows? I really can't tell you.
Okay.
He wasn't a quack. He was a proper.
No, he was legit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for a while, the pair kept their trysts, fairly secretive. But it's rumored that they were caught in flagrante in her drawing room by friends. So that's when the ballyhoo really kicked off. Yeah. And soon the upper crust genteel society was aghast at Florence and James's shenanigans, and the pair became social pariahs. And dear Florence's desperate letters for understanding and support, which she sent to her parents and sister, went unanswered. Oh. So pretty tough life happening for Florence now, but something else happened to make her life even more difficult and complicated. Any idea?
I'd like to say that she might have had a child out of wedlock, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well, you're so close, because in 1873, the beleaguered lovebirds took a getaway to Bavaria, where she discovered she was pregnant.
Oh.
Without much choice, she agreed to an abortion performed by Dr. Gully. Sadly, his skills were lacking, and she became terribly ill, and later said she would have died without the 24/7 care of her lady's companion, a widow actually named Jane Cox. This abortion disaster ended the unusual relationship between Florence and James on Florence's part. Let's have a look at the companion, whose name is Jane Cox, as I mentioned. What do you think of Jane? She's in photo 7.
Oh, she's very plain, very matronly. That's the word to use her on her.
Agreed.
I would have said they may have had a relationship too.
You think? Well, they certainly were very, very close. There was never, I didn't find any literal hint of them having any sort of intimate relationship other than real friendship. But I guess
that could be the relationship back then. You know, like women could have friendships, but that's the extent of it.
Right. Okay. So you're saying that could have been it.
Yeah.
Very intimate, but non-sexual relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, they became so close that, in fact, Florence hired Jane to oversee the responsibilities of the Priory mansion. Now, Jane began to realize that Florence craved something in her life. What do you think that was, Darcy?
I'm going to say acceptance as well for society, but I think it's also she craved love.
Absolutely. Florence was tired of being socially ostracized, and she lamented the lack of a familial relationship. She missed her family, and I think she missed, as you say, having her own love, romantic love. She needed a way back into respectability. So how did she attain that, Darcy?
Wow, that would be through the lawyer guy.
Okay. And it was Jane Cox who introduced Florence to Charles Bravo. Yes, we're talking the guy who was earlier, writhing in the bed, dying.
Yeah.
And Jane Cox knew from as a business associate of her former husband. And the two, surprisingly enough, to my way of thinking anyway, a physical attraction was evident between Florence and Charles. And in October of 1875, Charles popped the question. And Florence said yes. Now, to give Florence credit, and you had mentioned she has wisdom, she informed the doctor, James Gully, of her engagement. And then she told Charles about her affair with the older physician, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Yes, considering back then everything would have been kept a secret.
Right. Although perhaps, because it was, gossiped about, she might have feared he would have learned it anyway, being in the locale. Charles, of course, was understandably shocked, but he said he admired her honesty and said it probably meant she wouldn't err again.
Yes.
Mighty good of him, because he actually admitted the next day himself to a long-term relationship and an illegitimate daughter. So the pair agreed not to discuss their pasts again, but instead to move forward and marry, which I think is pretty forward-thinking for the time, don't you think?
Absolutely, for that time frame.
Yeah. So we've laid the setting now. We've met our characters. Florence expects to be welcomed back into her society and her family and be loved. And Charles expects money and position. So everybody should be tickety-boo.
Right.
But again, Florence had the upper hand in this. Prior to the wedding, she did something quite unusual. She broke with tradition and the earlier common law and decided not to transfer her wealth, control of her wealth, to Charles, as was common and customary, but she kept it for herself.
Good for her.
But as you can imagine, when Charles found out, he flipped when he learned, and he said, I'm going to cancel the wedding. He told her father, this kills me. I cannot contemplate a marriage that does not make me master in my own house. I cannot sit upon a chair or eat from a table which does not belong to me. Yet he expects to get this for free from his wife.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the hypocrisy. Upset, Florence heads off and talks to her former lover and now possibly confidant, Dr. Gully. And he advised her not to squabble about the furniture and wished her happiness. Now, I don't think £40,000, $10 million is furniture.
Yeah.
But Florence, obviously, as you had said, wise woman, took some time, came up with quite a good response and compromise. In the end, she gave Charles the lease to the house, the priory, as well as all the furnishings, and he would be in her will. No details as to what percentage he might get. while she retained control of her money. So Charles agreed to that, and they were wed. So have a look at our next photo, number 8, which shows, it's the hardest one to see, but I presume it's the happy couple. I say happy as a presumption because they don't look that happy.
No, they don't. And they're sitting apart from each other. It looks like she's in the forefront.
Yeah, they are totally apart from each other. And he now has, it seems to me, quite the heavy whiskers,
Yes.
more mutton chops than he had before. I don't know that it's hard to see from the photograph, but I wouldn't say they were extraordinarily happy or close.
Me neither.
Do you gain anything else from that photograph?
Well, is the Jane person in this photograph too?
I do not know. There's no one there with glasses, and I think Jane obviously wore glasses. She could be the woman in the bar outside left, but that's just a guess. There's no indication of who the rest are.
Okay, in between the two of them, I keep seeing an image. I know there isn't one there, but I feel like there is someone still between the two of them, even though they have agreed not to talk about their past. I think one of them is still seeing someone.
And can you tell what gender that person is?
It looks like a man, not a woman, but
so we think it would, then we presume we just go with the typical, that it would be possibly her lover, not his lover.
Well, yeah, okay, let's go with that one.
We have no indication that Charles was interested in men.
Yeah.
Nor do we have any indication that Florence was interested in women. Okay,
That's
but
right.
you think it's a man standing between them?
Yes.
You think it's Dr. Gully? You've seen it.
That's funny because I'm going to say no, but then again, is her? Yeah, no, no.
Okay.
I still think she has something for Dr. Gully, even though she's let him go because of the abortion. But I don't feel like it's like that.
Okay. Well, our stage is well set. We're now coming back to that opulent priory bedroom, Darcy, where Charles Bravo is suffering horrifically. So what is going on with poor Charles here?
He's been duped.
In what way?
Well, hopefully he signed everything over to her if he dies. Okay. I actually think he's been fed poison.
Now, why do you think that? Just because he's in agony?
It's not just the agony. I can smell almonds.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so over 3 days, Charles is examined by 6 medical professionals, some excellent ones, like the top in the country, and all agreed he'd been poisoned, likely by arsenic, and would die. Now, I think cyanide smells like almonds, not arsenic, but I'm not entirely certain.
That's okay. That's how I knew it was poison, because of the smell of almonds. So I'm open to it being arsenic, rat poison, but
Yes.
it was the idea I could smell it. So therefore he's been poisoned.
Gotcha. Okay, you weren't saying necessarily the kind of poison, but you nailed it right there when you said rat poison, and you'll find out fairly quickly. The doctors learned that when Charles first took ill, he had burst from his bedroom, shouting for Florence and demanding hot water. Minutes later, Mrs. Cox found him vomiting out the bedroom window. She instructed the maid to bring a mixture of mustard and hot water, which she poured down Charles's throat, causing him to vomit. He then became unconscious and medical help was sought. When Florence was asked whether there was any arsenic in the house, she said yes, there was rat poison in the stables. Oddly enough, over the next 3 days, Charles was semi-lucid some of the time, and he admitted to rubbing laudanum, which is an opiate, onto his gums to help with a toothache. The doctors demanded to know what other poison he might have taken, but he insisted only laudanum. The docs tried their best, but over the final 2 days, Charles's condition spirals downward, his body writhing in convulsions and pain, plunging him into delirium and unconsciousness. Pretty horrific time for the man.
No kidding.
While her husband suffers this torturous agony, the rumor mill and gossiping tongues wag ferociously outside the house, with suggestions that Florence might have been involved in his pain, fueled by whispers of financial difficulties, marital disharmony, and extramarital affairs on both sides. So what happens to Charles Bravo, Darcy?
He should die. Sorry. He should die during all this because, and was this after the wedding, or can I ask, or is it years later?
It's only 4 months since they were married.
Yeah. I actually don't think she did it,
Okay.
even though I would have questioned about her first husband. But, if she did a third one, I would say probably Black Widow, but I'm sort of feeling that it's not her.
Okay, well, we'll explore that. Around 5:20 a.m. on April 21st, 1876, Charles Turner Bravo draws his last breath, 55 hours after his first collapse. Toxology tests revealed that he had indeed ingested a deadly poison called antimony, which is arsenic, and soon everyone pointed to Florence as the culprit.
Yes.
In fact, the postmortem found that Charles had consumed 10 times the lethal dose via what's called a tartar emetic, a solution designed to produce vomiting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's some contemplation that in those days, people used these emetics to cause others to vomit because they wanted to stop them from being drinkers, or because they wanted to make their lives miserable, but they didn't necessarily want to kill them.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess taking this sort of thing wasn't totally unusual for a vomiting perspective. However, 10 times the lethal dose is a bit much. So we have a coroner's inquest, obviously, and in that inquest, it stated that the death was likely, believe it or not, a suicide. And wanting to spare the feelings of Charles's family, the coroner kept the inquiry private and didn't request Florence to testify.
Okay.
How do you think? And then the jury came up with an open verdict, I guess not surprising, stating there was insufficient evidence to show how the antimony got into his system. No one had a reasonable and sensible reason for Charles to commit suicide, much less in such a horrendously painful and lengthy manner. The suggestion of suicide didn't go down well with his family, his friends, the newspapers, or the public, as you can imagine, I think.
Yes.
In fact, the Daily Telegraph newspaper brought national attention to his death and denounced the secrecy of the inquest. This caused wave after wave of public outcry and gossip and media interest, exploding the entire situation. And of course, Florence's shocking affair with the older doctor made headlines, along with sightings of Jane Cox with Dr. Gully. What were they planning? And suggestions that Jane had been fired, which gave her a motive to kill her employer, Charles Bravo. In all this, Florence took ill, and Jane left the priory for other accommodations. The government concluded that the preliminary inquiry was insufficient, especially since neither Florence nor Jane testified. They both quickly provided written statements through lawyers. So, as you can imagine, both women, Darcy, were subject to public scrutiny and derision. What do you think our next big event is here?
Well, they probably went to trial, but what I was going to say is, why didn't they look at the mixture that Jane had help make that caused them to vomit? Because that's one way of getting a lot of that into his system.
Yes, that's true. But he was ill from the start, and she gave him the emetic, which caused him to vomit. So I don't know how much it would have stayed in his system, but it's certainly a way of ingesting poison. There's no doubt.
Okay, I would say that this went to trial.
Okay, well, you're not quite right. It went to another coroner's inquest.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it was held in July through August in 1876. It was, of course, covered by the press of the country, if not the world, and was of great interest to the public. The testimony lasted an astonishing 23 days, which is an incredibly long length of time.
Yeah.
One of the physicians who attended Charles in his last hours stated that he did not behave like a man who thought he was being murdered, and he showed no surprise he was dying of poison. So remember, this is quite an interesting scenario. Charles survived for 3 days after we think he ingested the poison and was in and out of consciousness, so it was able to respond to questioning at times. Well, he, still alive, didn't think he was being murdered. So that's a bit odd, don't you find?
Well, yeah, because one would think that he'd be screaming foul play.
Exactly, and naming somebody and desperately wanting that person to be caught.
Yeah.
This doctor believed Charles had swallowed the antimony deliberately, but lost his nerve, and that's when he cried out for the hot water to flush it out of the system. This doctor was convinced Florence was innocent. Now, I've got a lively black and white drawing of the inquest. It's quite evocative. It's photo number 9. You'll see sketches of Charles and Florence in the upper corners, Darcy. But our interest is the throng of men sitting around a huge table. They're careful as a lawyer.
I don't have photo number 9.
You don't have photo number 9. Bummer.
It says 6 to 9, but I've got 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay, just a sec. I will send it to you.
Oh, I've got 9 and 10.
Sorry about that. Okay, let's find it. It's a black and white with a bunch of people around a big table.
Yep, nope. Don't have it. That's the one.
Okay, it's coming on way now. Okay. Here she comes. Okay. Going your way. Thank goodness for the speed of this stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Waiting.
Yeah.
Maybe fast, but it's taking its sweet time.
Yeah, sometimes it does take its sweet time. Absolutely.
There it is.
Okay. So we have a throng of men around a big table listening, and I believe we have a lawyer on the right, and I think it might be Mrs. Cox standing up. She's got glasses. She looks matronly, as you described her. So maybe perhaps she's giving her testimony. I don't know if that helps you in any way, but that's the only thing I have that is related to the actual second inquest.
It's interesting that they're all men, and this is bigger than a jury. Yeah, I would say I would agree that's Mrs. Cox. But
Okay.
I'm feeling, strangely enough, I do not feel threatened. I feel like these men are open to listening. They're more, their attitude is women couldn't do this. That's
Okay.
what I'm feeling.
Okay. Well, at least they're open.
Yeah.
Well, some of the salacious details exposed during the 3 weeks of testimony included that Charles was overbearing, critical of Florence's extravagance and penchant for alcohol, jealous of her close relationship to Jane Fox, whom he threatened to fire, and of course, insanely jealous about her closeness with James Gully. It was also revealed that Florence became pregnant twice and had miscarried both times, which was to Charles's great dismay. I presume it was to Florence's as well, but they don't mention that. Near the end of the inquest, Florence herself testified for 3 days. The Bravo family lawyer pummeled her with intrusive and explosive questions, fixated on proving that Florence continued her affair with Dr. Gully during her marriage, and repeatedly questioned her on her past sexual conduct and what he called criminal intimacy with Dr. Gully. Obviously, he was trying to create a motive for her to kill her husband.
Yeah.
By day 3, Florence had taken enough and she fought back. Would you read her words in photo number 10, if that arrived?
Okay, just a minute. Photo 10. Okay, it says, that attachment to Dr. Gully has nothing to do with this case. The death of Mr. Bravo. I have been subject to sufficient pain and humiliation already, and I appeal to the coroner and the jury as men and Britons to protect me. I think it is great shame that I should be thus questioned. I refuse to answer any further questions with regard to Dr. Golly. That's pretty brassy.
It is, isn't it? And based on your a feeling of acceptance and willingness to listen from the picture of the coroner's inquest on our image number 9, what do you think the audience thought of her comments?
I think they actually listened to what she had to say, because she's right. It had nothing to do. She may have kept her friendship, but so did he with the mother of his child.
Right. Well, you're totally right. They agreed with her comments. And in fact, they did what one is able to do in order not to get kicked out of court. They loudly shuffled their feet to show their support for her. So eventually it came out that the only place that the antimony poison could have been available for Charles to take was in a bedside water jug, which he drank from every night. Now, no evidence came to light against Florence. She had not prepared food for her husband, she didn't give him any medicine, and she had not purchased poison in her name. Remember, in those days, one had to sign the poison register at the chemist in order to make a purchase. So, in fact, no real new evidence came out at all in the second inquest, despite its length and scandalous revelations. So, what do you think the jury decided in this inquest, Darcy?
I would hope that they acquitted her and let her go.
Right. Well, they dismissed the idea of suicide. They dismissed the idea of death by misadventure. And they determined that Charles Turner Bravo had been willfully murdered by the administration of a tartar emetic by unknown person or persons.
Okay.
So Florence Bravo was not indicted.
Well, that actually makes sense.
Okay. What do you think happened to Jane Cox after?
She might have been indicted.
What do you really think?
Honestly, I think that there were still questions around her.
Okay, well, she packed her bag and left. She got a notice of eviction, as all servants did, from the Bravo family, because of course now they had the priory.
Yeah.
So she was gone. And what happened to poor Florence? Have a look at her sketch. Have a look at her in our last photograph, which is sketch number 11. She doesn't look quite as gorgeous in this one, so I don't think the artist is being very fair to her.
No.
What do you think of Florence at this moment?
Well, at this moment, I feel someone who, she's not destitute, because I would hope she still has her money, but I would have thought she'd leave the area as well.
And what do you see for her future?
Maybe a little home somewhere. Not elaborate like what she has, but maybe a little home and far away from this area as possible, so she can clear her name.
And do you think she had a long and productive life?
No, yeah, that one I'm not 100% sure of, but given maybe she might have made it. I don't think she killed herself, okay, but I do feel like it wasn't as happy as it was when she first bought her mansion. And it's very feasible her and Dr. Golly could have gone back together at this point.
Okay, well, sadly, she and the doctor didn't get back together. She did change her name. She did flee the area and go to another area completely and live in a much more reduced circumstances. I think she still had lots of money, but she lived as a recluse. And sadly, she slowly drank herself to death and died at the age of 33.
Really?
Isn't that sad?
Wow. No wonder she looks so old. Okay, if she's drinking that much, holy cow.
Yeah. When you think, it's such a shame. She obviously had a difficult time. I mean, having the relationship with Dr. Gully, having the abortion, meeting Charles and maybe not having a great relationship with him, and losing 2 children. But she was only 30. She had a ton of money. She had beauty. I would have hoped she could have started over, as you say, somewhere else in a more positive vein, but it just crushed her, I guess, and she was not able to surmount it.
Wow.
So the question is, who really poisoned Charles Bravo?
I am going to say I'm under the impression he did it to himself, but hoped to be able to survive and still be able to blame her and take everything from her.
You think that was his motivation, to a pretense of suicide? So he didn't want to commit suicide.
No, I don't think he really planned on committing suicide. Now, I'm open to the Miss Jane doing it too, but everything shouts that it was a man to me.
Okay, well then, do you think he just didn't have the courage to admit he'd taken the antimony himself during the 3 days that he was suffering?
Absolutely. Because think of the stigma that would have been against him then. You
Yeah.
go out for trying to commit suicide then. You go into a funny farm.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
Yeah,
what they used to call them then.
Yeah.
Well, sanitarium. That's what they really called them.
yeah, sanatorium, that's right. And not to mention how embarrassing it must have been to think that you were so stupid that you took 10 times as much, and you're going to die, and there's no way they can stop you from dying. But you're not going to admit to that failure. I can see how very few people would admit to the failure, that they were the ones who did it themselves.
Well, there have been many attempts at suicide where people try it and then at the last minute they change their mind and do whatever is necessary.
Right. But you're saying he didn't really want to commit suicide. You're saying he was deliberately injuring himself so that he could do that against her and take the money.
Her again, and the idea that he's going to get sympathy. They're already wagging their tongues about him, that, he could have gained a lot of sympathy for this.
Yes. Well, I guess poor guy, he must have got a lot of sympathy in the 3 days he was suffering, but then he died. So not much gained there.
Nope.
What a rotten deal all around.
No kidding.
Jeez. Nobody benefited. Nobody did well, despite money, romance, sex, societal position, and youth. Only 30, the two of them.
Really? And think about it. It would have been easy. It wouldn't even have been easier to divorce her then, unless he could prove that she was unstable.
Yeah, like they were only together for 4 months. So it's not like they'd had years and years and years of acrimony and, treachery and betrayal and all that stuff. I hope they were sincere when they said they were going to put their past behind them when they started out on their wedding and their marriage. And in 4 months isn't enough time, really, I don't think, to really go down that kind of just disastrous relationship where you can't stand one another and want to blame the other for your death so you can get away from them.
Yeah, that wasn't long enough to be married to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre. So you think Charles did it to himself, but not because he wanted to die?
I do. I think that maybe he wanted attention. He wanted that, if he's already being badmouthed in society, he wants something better to happen.
Yes, well, I can see along that line, he would, really garner a lot of sympathy if he, had been almost murdered, saved, and then he was able to cast doubt on his wife. He would maybe get a huge amount of sympathy from society, which for him would be, I guess, a validation.
A huge one.
Yeah. God. Okay, well, that's the sad story, I think, of Charles and Florence Bravo. Really, it's a no-win all around.
It is.
Despite the trappings of wealth and society and youth and beauty. Yeah, real disappointment.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That was interesting.
It was different.
Thank you for listening to Seeing Dead People, where goosebumps are guaranteed. We would love to hear from you with questions for Darcy about her psychic process or suggestions for other mystifying situations you would like us to investigate. Please shoot us an email to info@radiosydney.ca with Seeing Dead People in the subject line. New episodes air on our website, radiosydney.ca, on the first Saturday of every month. Episodes repeat Saturday nights at 8 p.m. and Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., both Pacific time. All episodes are available as downloadable podcasts at our website or on our YouTube channel, Nicola Furlong Mysteries. I'm Dorian Mortis, weirdly keen on seeing dead people. This has been a presentation of Radio Sydney.